WikiLeaks has posted thousands of emails hacked from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. The Clinton campaign called it a crime reminiscent of Watergate.
The accusations that Russia's been meddling in the U.S. election.
Bombshell revelations from a new round of released emails from WikiLeaks.
They plan to release thousands of pages of these emails every day up to the election.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. Hacks, leaks, and possible cyber attacks. What all those emails reveal about Hillary Clinton and the media covering her. Kurdish news outlets struggling to survive in the aftermath of the failed coup in Turkey. Freeze. The Kremlin-owned news channel RT is in the news. A bank in Britain has frozen its account. And a weather alert for American voters.
All the way to the middle of Texas, we're going to be experiencing massive construction fronts, okay?
It's been one of those stories that's been drip-fed to the news media. WikiLeaks' continuous release of some juicy details about Hillary Clinton's campaign for the White House. We now know that the emails in question were hacked from the account of Clinton's campaign chief, John Podesta. As is often the case with leaks, not all of the material qualifies as revelatory. Much of it confirms what most already suspected. Clinton's position on banking regulations differs, for instance, depending on whether she's meeting with bankers or with voters. And her relationship with the U.S. mainstream media is a bit too close, too cozy for comfort. This is a story that reaches in different directions overseas, with the allegations as yet unconfirmed that Russian operatives and/or the Kremlin were behind the hacking, as well as the decision taken this past week by the Ecuadorian government to plug the leaks. The government in Quito is now denying its house guest, Julian Assange, access to the internet at its London embassy. Ecuador says it took the decision because it has a policy of not intervening in the electoral affairs of other countries. Assange has a policy too. He does that for a living. Our starting point this week is not a city or a country, it's an address, john.podesta@gmail.com. Like most government towns, Washington has seen its share of political hacks. This one was different. Among the smoking guns produced by WikiLeaks, this email from an editor at the Boston Globe to the Clinton campaign, coordinating the timing of an op-ed piece the candidate's team would write for the paper. It would be good to get it in on Tuesday when she's in New Hampshire. That would give her a big presence on Tuesday with the piece, and on Wednesday with the news story. Please let me know. There are plenty of emails written by Clinton staffers discussing which reporters were friendly and potentially useful. That is not unusual. However, the degree of cooperation the campaign got was, including from the outlet that calls itself America's newspaper of record.
So they selected a New York Times reporter by the name of Mark Leibovich, saying that he seemed sympathetic. Well, a week after they selected him for the interview, he emails the Clinton campaign, and he gives them a list of the questions he asked and a few of the answers that Hillary Clinton gave that he thought that the Clinton campaign would object to. And he gave them veto power, his words, to sort of excise whichever questions they didn't like. And sure enough, the Clinton campaign pointed to two of the questions, and they said, you know, we don't want this in your piece in the New York Times. And it never appeared, and never saw the light of day.
It is normal for campaigns to reach out and see if a reporter's interested in a story. There are some emails in there that are problematic. So there was one where a Politico writer sent an email to Podesta with text of the article, basically asking for approval on that text. That is not okay. That is giving a source control over how you represent them, which you cannot do. There are some bad reporters, and those reporters do not speak for the profession as a whole.
All presidential campaigns and politicians try to work with the media to ensure favorable media coverage. The Podesta emails show that the Clinton campaign has perhaps done this to an unprecedented degree. Previous emails released from Secretary Clinton have also shown that journalists worked with the Clinton campaign, asked for feedback on articles. You know, they didn't just ask for quotes, they asked for things that they should emphasize. And I think that's very troubling.
The Clinton camp is very closed off to the rest of the world. They are very loyal to each other, utilizing radio silence when needed. So, yeah, in order to get some access to the Clinton campaign, you had to agree somehow to play by their rules. And I think even if this is the way things are done, it does sow a quite profound distrust in the media.
The first set of leaks from Julian Assange and company came 3 months ago and revealed political malpractice at the heart of the Democratic National Committee, the ruling party's governing body. The DNC chairperson, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, was supposed to be neutral. The leaked emails exposed her as a pro-Clinton, anti-Bernie Sanders operative. She was forced to resign and was instantly, unashamedly, hired by Clinton's own campaign. First, it was anonymous intelligence sources. Now the Obama administration is openly accusing Russia of interference and online espionage.
Consistent with the methods and motivations of Russian-directed efforts.
And that has become the conventional political wisdom within the Washington Beltway, which includes the media.
There is growing evidence that Russia is using WikiLeaks as a delivery vehicle for hacked emails and other information.
There are very good reasons to believe that Russia is behind the hack of the DNC, because code that was used in the hack of the DNC was also used in code that hacked targets in Germany, official targets in Germany that have been linked back to Russian hacker groups. We don't have as good forensic evidence when it comes to the Podesta hack, but it seems hard to believe that there would be lots of targeted attacks that would end up going to WikiLeaks that weren't Russia. Does that mean Russia's directing WikiLeaks? No, not necessarily. It just means that there's a confluence of interests.
The Obama administration has vested interest in seeing their successor elected. And certainly, this would not be the first time that they've deceived the American public in order to further a national security goal. So journalists should report on the fact that the Obama administration has come out and said that they are fairly confident that Russia is behind some of these hacks. But they also have to make clear that that is not a statement of fact, that is a statement of what the United States government is saying. They should report it as this is what the United States government is saying.
One of the largest media canards being thrown out there is the notion that WikiLeaks is pro-Trump. And I would recommend people who believe this to go watch an interview Julian Assange did with Democracy Now!, in which he said, choosing between Trump and Clinton.
Do I prefer cholera or gonorrhea? Personally, I would prefer neither.
And when I interviewed Assange, he told me that the reason he and WikiLeaks have been so intensely critical of Hillary Clinton is because she is one of the most hawkish presidential candidates in recent U.S. history. She's essentially supported every U.S. war in the past 20 years. And glowingly at that. And this notion that WikiLeaks is pro-Russia, I think, is also fascinating because WikiLeaks has criticized Russia. In its book, The WikiLeaks Files, there's an entire chapter on Russia which is very critical of the Russian government and Putin.
I've heard from so many of you.
In U.S. political parlance, the term October surprise refers to any big news story that can affect the result of November's vote. And that's how some in the media have described Julian Assange's month-long series of leaks. The real October surprise came this past week, when Assange had his internet connection cut. The Ecuadorian government announced that it did the cord cutting, saying that while Quito reaffirms the asylum granted to Julian Assange and reiterates its intention to safeguard his life until he reaches a safe place, it was temporarily restricting his internet access because Ecuador does not interfere in external electoral processes, nor does it favor any particular candidate.
I've definitely felt that there was a degree of hypocrisy in the Ecuadorian government's statement. This notion that they don't want to interfere in other governments, and obviously, all WikiLeaks does is sort of interfere with Western governments in particular. I would not be surprised if perhaps there was a tit for tat where the United States pointed out, well, if you have this foreign actor essentially on Ecuadorian soil in your embassy in London, who is actively putting out documents that are interfering with our election, why wouldn't we then interfere with your election? And it may be that they saw the sense in that.
Ecuador has denied it caved under pressure from Washington, saying it acted on its own. To call this a complicated story is to sell its complexities short. But setting aside how the emails were made public, the alleged agendas of some of the players involved, and the possible agendas of others alleged to be involved, the one institution clearly and undeniably sullied by the publication of all those cozy emails is the American news media.
It's important to see Americans' distrust in the media as a reflection overall of Americans' distrust in the political system.
Jail Hillary! Jail Hillary!
We're facing an election right now in which we have the two least popular presidential candidates in U.S. history. So it's not just that Americans distrust the media, it's that they distrust the political system as a whole.
It's cozy, but out of necessity. It's impossible to get access to within the Clinton campaign. It's its own little universe of confidants and people who have proven to be trustworthy and loyal. So if you want to get in the campaign, you have to play by their rules. And I guess some people had no compunctions over playing by the rules.
I would say I probably speak for every journalist in Washington when I say I'm glad that it's not my emails that were hacked, because I suspect that we all have something that kind of looks bad in the light of day.
On the download now, our viewers weigh in on WikiLeaks, the Clinton campaign, and allegations of interference in the U.S. elections.
I think it's pretty clear that the Clinton campaign and the U.S. media more generally have drawn on links between Trump, Putin, and WikiLeaks as a scare tactic. The target audience is likely voters over 40 years old who tend to associate Putin and Russia with Cold War-era fears of a Soviet takeover that many Americans experienced for 4 decades. We saw this in Wednesday's debate when Clinton sidestepped an uncomfortable question about her advocacy of open borders by raising Russia and Putin's role in the cyber attacks on her emails that revealed information damaging to her campaign.
I think the media does tend to have a more liberal bias, and Trump has garnered more negative press than the average GOP candidate. But at the same time, I think that's because it's hard to be sympathetic to someone who's so uniquely unqualified and bigoted and immature by the standards of any presidential candidate in modern history. I think the idea of a Trump presidency terrifies all of us, including a lot of journalists. So in their work, I think journalists are trying to portray to the public, illustrate the dangers of a Trump presidency and what our world would look like if we were to elect Trump and put him in office.
We're always looking to hear from our viewers. If you've got an opinion on the news media, you can follow our Facebook or Twitter page to find out what stories we're working on next. Our Twitter handle is @AJListeningPost. Then fire up your camera, make a worthwhile point about the media, hit send, and we'll see you on the download. Other media stories that are on our radar this week. The government of Ethiopia, which declared a state of emergency 2 weeks ago, has now spelled out what that actually means. Among the measures taken, it is now illegal for Ethiopians to watch 2 television channels that the government disapproves of, Ethiopian satellite television and the Oromia media network. Both are offshore outlets based in the U.S. and are popular news sources in a country where the media are heavily controlled. Posting links from either of the channels' websites has been declared a criminal activity. Contacting opposition groups that the government calls terrorist movements has also been banned. And anyone caught breaking the new rules risks a jail term of 3 to 5 years. The state of emergency was declared after hundreds were killed in anti-government protests in the Oromia and Amhara regions. Russia's state-owned English-language news channel RT has had its bank accounts frozen in the UK, and Moscow says it doesn't believe the story coming out of London that the British government had nothing to do with it.
Let's now update you on our breaking news story.
RT banks with NatWest, which is part of the Royal Bank of Scotland group, whose major stakeholder is the UK government. RT says it received this letter from the bank saying that NatWest will no longer service the channel and that its accounts will be cancelled and closed within 2 months. The bank also says its decision is final. The British government has said it's up to the bank to decide who it offers its services to, and that no new sanctions have been imposed on Russia. However, Russian officials have characterized the freeze as an attack on freedom of the media. A spokeswoman for the Foreign Ministry wrote on Facebook, "It looks like as it leaves the EU, London has decided to leave behind all its obligations towards freedom of speech." Once again, the Malaysian government is going after political cartoonist Zulkifli Anwar ul Haq, better known as Zunar. Zunar likes to caricature abuse of power and government corruption. His work is published in books as well as on a site called Malaysia Kini, one of the few independent news outlets remaining in the country. Zunar has been arrested twice before, in 2010 and 2015. His office raided several times. He's currently facing 9 charges of sedition, which could see him sent to prison for a maximum of 43 years. And this past week, he was barred from leaving the country, which he ridiculed in his latest cartoon. "They can ban my books," Zunar says. "They can ban my cartoon. They can ban me from traveling, but they cannot ban my mind. I will keep drawing until the last drop of my ink." 3 months after the failed military coup in Turkey, media outlets there are still dealing with the aftermath. The government has blamed the coup on Gulenists, followers of Fethullah Gulen, an Islamic preacher exiled in the United States. Dozens of news organizations have been shut down. However, the purge is not limited to those allegedly affiliated with the Gulen movement. Late last month, another 25 media outlets were ordered closed, most of them Kurdish. Kurds make up almost 20% of the Turkish population. There are almost 15 million of them. And the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party has been locked in an on and off guerrilla war with the Turkish state for years. These days, under an increasingly authoritarian president, Tayyip Erdogan, more and more Kurdish journalists are being treated as enemies of the state. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on Turkey's war against the Kurdish media, both inside and outside the country.
On the 28th of September, Turksat, a state-owned satellite operator, took more than 20 TV channels and radio stations off the air. The networks targeted either broadcast in Kurdish or provided an alternative narrative to the Turkish mainstream media. 5 days later, this started happening.
Cihan TV was broadcasting news and folk music in the Kurdish Zaza dialect. It got closed down. Zarok TV was broadcasting in Kurdish for kids. They were dubbing cartoons into both Zaza and Kermanji. Now, Kurdish kids won't be able to watch cartoons in their own language. Then there was Azadi TV, as well as TV10. TV10 catered to the Alavi community, broadcasting religious rituals in both Kurdish and Turkish. For that reason, it was very important.
Turkey's Radio and Television Board sent letters to provincial governors saying that these channels posed a threat to national security and requested they be closed down. After that, we found out from an agency news report that IMC TV was also on the list. As yet, we haven't received any legal notification.
What Bekir Güneş didn't know was that as we were interviewing him in Diyarbakir in Turkey's southeast, the IMC TV headquarters in Istanbul were being raided. IMC TV isn't even a Kurdish channel. It just covers Kurdish issues. Or it did. The channel was shut down. In the wake of the failed coup attempt on July 15th, President Erdogan declared a state of emergency. Since then, nearly 100 journalists have been jailed. Around 2,500 media workers lost their jobs, and 660 press cards have been cancelled across Turkey. These most recent closures indicate that the media crackdown is now widening. And under Emergency Decree 668, the government doesn't need to explain its actions.
Kurdish media poses a danger to type Erdogan's slogan, one state, one nation, one homeland. He wants to build a single structure. IMC TV is a channel that was established as an objection to that, and it was very well liked by the public in the Kurdish region. For example, we reported everything that happened in Cezre. We didn't say the state is doing this or the PKK is doing that. We just reported what happened and left the audience to decide for themselves.
Yanmış, kurşunlanmış, ağır silahların hedefi olmuş binalar.
Türk medyasında görmediğimiz bazı birçok
haberi. A lot of the stories that could no longer be seen in Turkish media could still be seen in Kurdish media. And as a result, the repression of Kurdish media has intensified. During a state of emergency, the usual norms are no longer invoked. So suddenly, you can be faced with decisions that otherwise could never have been taken. And this is what we've seen. Very radical, very harsh decisions that transform everything all at once.
All media organizations are under the umbrella of Turkey's Radio and Television Board, RUTUK. Someone makes a decision and Turksat turns off the switch. Then you wait for RUTUK to arrive. When they come, they count and confiscate all your possessions, and you're made to leave the building. From that point on, you are jobless.
Even if Kurdish journalists do end up getting their jobs back, much of their equipment seized in the raids has been given to the Turkish state channel TRT. And it isn't just Kurdish media within Turkey that have been shut down. Outlets outside the country have been forced to close as well. Channels like Mediaite, a Kurdish TV station based in Belgium, covered the closures back home from here for audiences inside Turkey and beyond. However, not long after that, the satellite company Eutelsat admitted that they too had come under pressure from Turkey's radio and television board. Within days of that, on October 3rd, the cameras here stopped rolling.
We will fight against this decision. We should be broadcasting in our land, in Kurdistan, in Turkey. But we had to leave because there was so much oppression and punishment. This studio in Brussels doesn't belong to Mediaite alone. There are many Kurdish journalists who live in Belgium, in Germany, France, Holland. But the main studio is here, so that when we broadcast, we are not under Turkish but European jurisdiction. But we know the Turkish government still exerts both political and financial pressure to shut us down.
The Kurdish media have long been under pressure. During the 1990s, at the peak of the fighting between the PKK and the Turkish military, Kurdish journalists fought to report the Kurdish story on their own terms. The start of a peace process in 2013 created space for a number of new Kurdish media outlets. But the climate changed as talks broke down. Now, Kurdish journalists are facing a new chapter in their story. And critics say they still see Kurdish media as a threat, little more than a mouthpiece for the outlawed PKK.
Kurdish media have never tried to be spokespersons for the PKK because the PKK has its own media. Of course, when you're reporting from the region, there's no way you won't be influenced by the activities of the PKK. But just as you're influenced, you also have the power to influence.
Influence comes at a price. Since the peace process fell apart more than a year ago, hundreds of Kurdish journalists have paid for their reporting. And not just with their jobs, with fines, prison time, even with their lives. And yet, still, there are many Kurds in Turkey and beyond, determined to get their story out, whichever way they can.
The doors have been locked and sealed, the screens are dark. But will journalists just sit at home scared? No, because as the whole world is aware, there is a new media system.
Now we have social media and citizen journalism. Despite the difficult circumstances, the Kurdish media and its workers will continue doing their jobs and informing the public. There will always be people who will communicate the news, the truth.
And finally, that's the media news. Time now for the weather and the forecast for the United States of America. With only 3 weeks until voting day, a political parody called Weatherman has been making the rounds on the World Wide Web. It was co-written by Joss Whedon, who is one of the best screenwriters in the business, and released by his Political Action Committee, what Americans call a PAC. Whedon is not a Donald Trump fan. His PAC is called Save the Day. Joss Whedon wants to boost voter turnout, particularly youth turnout, and this is his way of warning Americans about Hurricane Trump. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
With Donald Trump about to be sworn in as president, the weather has been pretty blustery. What can we expect, Frank?
Well, Jim, we are seeing a heavy wave of denial coming in from both coasts, trapping a high blood pressure front right in the heart of the country. Now, down south, that's going to push civil unrest back to the mid to early 60s. Now, along the bottom of the coast of California, all the way to the middle of Texas, we're going to be experiencing massive construction fronts, okay? It'll build up slightly, but then fall apart long before it finishes. So, look for scattered bankruptcies there and a much heavier shortfall moving from D.C. up to Wall Street. Now, coming down from the northern border, we can expect giggling and smug looks, followed, of course, by apologies when the Wall Street suckhole just pulls the ground out from under all 50 states.
Heavy stuff, Frank. I guess these days climate change isn't a hoax.
Only morons think that, Jim. But you know what? It's not all bad news. The rise in both temperature and existential misery will be cooled by the nuclear winter coming in from the southeast. Now, that should take out all sentient life on the continent, and we can look for that within the first 100 days.